It is the witching season, and I haven't done one of these in a little while, so I thought, why don't I put together a first 5 scary games list where I will count down my personal 5 picks that you should play if you want to get spooked and get into the Halloween spirit. I'm going to start with number 5, which is Dying Light. Came out in 2013 from Techland. This game, although it has a kind of bunk story, it's going to creep you out. It is an incredibly cool zombie chasing after you, but you've got some parkour type abilities experience, and that's what makes it so special. Usually when we play a lot of these survival horror games, things move rather slow and gingerly, and then they scare you a little bit like that. But with Dying Light, terror is ferocious, and it's constantly pursuing you at a high rate of speed, and you've got to leap across buildings and scramble up phone poles and do everything that you can to not get attacked or get caught by all of these zombies that are chasing you. And there are lots of incredible sequences that happen during the daylight with the sun glowing overhead and everything is cast everywhere, and you could drop all kinds of noisemakers and attract zombies to specific areas. But things get really hairy at night because the zombies get a little bit tougher and scary and you can't see them. And you've got to use all the tricks and the wits that you have to survive for as long as you can. Now, Dying Light has had a really long lifespan, believe it or not. It still is played by lots and lots of people around the world today. There's some really cool multiplayer that's a part of it. And of course, Dying Light 2 is what Techland has been investing in, and that's coming out next year. I got an awesome demo of that game at E3 this year, so I can't wait for Dying Light 2. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I still love Dying Light. Number 4 for me might not be your number 4. I get it, and I want to see some of your suggestions in the comments below. But number 4 for me is a game that I remember being unbelievably terrified while I was playing it on my PC, and this was Doom 3, which came out in 2004. id Software worked on this game for a long time. A real step into cinematic quality lighting, unbelievably well-textured enemies, and lots of creatures that would jump out of the shadows. And what they played with was this idea of this decrepit Mars station where you had to use your flashlight and your weaponry very cagily, and it was a terrifying experience because you could really only have one thing in your hand at a time, and you constantly couldn't see where you were going and what was ahead of you because you had to put the flashlight out and then you'd scramble to get the gun and shoot. So it was a very different Doom experience. It was very much a game that seemed to be influenced by the success of Resident Evil and other survival horror experiences like that. It's also what made Doom 3 kind of special. It wasn't a game that was loaded with lots and lots of enemies swarming you like the more recent Doom games are, which are less terrifying, more about a consistent and constant adrenaline rush. Doom 3 was definitely something where you had to think about your movements and you had to be kind of tactical and strategic, and you were still going to die because you just felt ill-equipped and like everything was against you, and it was unbelievably spooky and super cool. That's why it's in my first 5. Number 3 for me is another game that starts with a D, Dead Space, which Electronic Arts developed and published. The original Dead Space was a revelation. It definitely borrowed from the Resident Evil phenomenon, and it had lots of different homages to aliens and other sci-fi horror greats that we had seen in the past. It was so unbelievably spooky and filled with atmosphere and so cool. That was another element of the original Dead Space that I think we kind of forgot, you know? Like, it was just filled with unbelievably slick technology. The fact that you had this floating UI information that went along with you was just so revolutionary in its day. You felt like you had cool tech as a character in the game, and that maybe that cool tech would help you persevere against the horrors, things that will pop out of the walls and grab you, and all kinds of beasties that were coming out to kill you. Also incredibly lonely, and every single voice beat that you would hear in your radio would sort of get your heart going, like, oh my god, maybe I can make it to that person and I can survive for a little bit. And of course you would see all kinds of just unbelievable destruction, all of this carnage that would happen. And if you made the wrong move, you were gonna be just ripped apart in just grotesque, horrific ways, and always made me squirm. I didn't ever want to get ripped apart, so it was incredibly effective. Dead Space 2 was also a pretty terrific game as well, and then they changed up the whole pattern with Dead Space 3, and they kind of lost the vibe and the feel of what Dead Space was all about. But Dead Space 1 still stands as an incredible experience, and if you haven't played it, track down a game system that you can play this thing on. It's amazing. Number 2 for me goes way back as well. This is called Condemned: Criminal Origins. And that Criminal Origins part is important because you played a crime scene investigator in this game. I think Greg Grunberg actually did the voiceover work for the title. It was another game that had you thinking about every move that you made, and it also played with shadows and darkness and being creeped out, and also some pretty cool police tech that you had to deal with, but not a lot of projectile weaponry. That was in short supply in this game. This was a game more about melee attacks and melee combat in order to survive, but for the most part you were like running. You were trying to get the hell away, and you had to be cautious of the sounds that you make. Sound played an unbelievably important part in this title. It had one of the best audio soundscapes that I'd ever heard in any video game. It was incredibly creepy, incredibly effective. Really tied into the narrative in such ingenious and clever ways. Condemned is amazing. Monolith Productions, who went on to create all kinds of awesome things for us, most recently the Shadow of Mordor games. I would love Monolith to revisit this franchise. And No One Lives Forever as well, which is not in my scary games list. But yes, definitely check out Condemned: Criminal Origins, and the sequel, Condemned 2, was also really good and really scary as well.
Ready for death, Agent Thomas.
Now, you can probably guess what my number 1 is going to be. Resident Evil 4 for GameCube, but it's been subsequently released on every platform, and that's why this gets the top spot, because Resident Evil 4 is available to everybody. You can get it on the Switch as of this year. You play it as Leon S. Kennedy, and you go into this European village, and you notice that everybody is completely effed up and out to kill you, and it's very, very spooky, but it was also unbelievably well handled. All the mechanics were so fun, and it felt incredible to dodge roll out of the way, or bust through windows, or jump from the top of ladders. You were constantly threatened by this impending dread, and there's lots of creepy installations that you have to kind of navigate into. Don't go in there, they're so spooky. I remember, I guess they're creepy monks that are just chanting, and they're all around you, and I just, the sound and the vibe of everything, and the grime everywhere, I was just, oh my God, I was completely horrified playing that game. It's a wonderful experience, and of course it's been up-resed and tuned, and it's a masterpiece, you know? It's one of the best games ever made. I remember Tommy and I reviewing that game, and we were just like on the GameCube and just completely blown away by the quality and the experience and the unforgettable terror that is Resident Evil 4. That would be my number 1 spot. Of course, there are some runners-up here that I have to mention. One of them would be Resident Evil 2, which just came out this year, which is, another incredible achievement from Capcom. They modernized all of the stuff that was presented in the original PlayStation 1 release of Resident Evil 2, and they made the controls a lot tighter, and all the stuff that was sort of rendered in the background that you just kind of had to tank control around, you smoothly and elegantly walk through and interact with, and, the encroaching zombie threat is just amazing in Resident Evil 2. Absolutely love that game. I also love Alien Isolation, which I know has its detractors, and I know that there's some AI issues with the alien, but the mood and the atmosphere was so effectively captured and so authentic feeling, and I remember being absolutely at the edge of my seat, like trying to run away from the alien and not get seen. That game really brings a lot of style and panache to the Alien franchise. It's a great escape. Until Dawn is kind of like a teen slasher horror movie game because there's so many, it's like you're playing cut sequences of a slasher flick. Very slick, very elegantly made. But the VR game that sort of works in conjunction with Until Dawn is called Rush of Blood. And this was one of the first PlayStation VR games that I played. And you're basically on a roller coaster. So it's kind of a gimmicky type of experience. It's a roller coaster from hell. And you're riding up and down and shooting at all kinds of targets before they get you, and axe dudes will come at you, and there's pig heads everywhere. Ugh, it was just creepy as hell. It's almost unfair, I find, with VR games for the developers to freak you out because you're so exposed, and all around you, and you just feel like you're a naked person and everything is out to stab you. It's really creepy, and that was very effective. Until Dawn, Rush of Blood. I thought that was super cool. the last runner-up has to be Silent Hill, although I haven't been that big of a fan of all of the games. There's been a few that have got me, and I can't even remember which ones because it's a little convoluted. It's time for Konami to reclaim that franchise and make us the definitive Silent Hill game like Resident Evil 4 Caliber, if you know what I'm talking about. But Silent Hill has to be spoken about because of its psychological terror, and it's not necessarily the amount of violence and gore that you see in the game. It's what you think is going to happen to you, and that was so effectively rendered in that franchise. All right, you guys, that was a lot of games. I think we went over our first 5, but that's a nice collection there. I would love to hear what your first 5 scary games would be. Let me know in the comments below.